the BBC, the British Broadcasting Corporation. For decades, the benchmark for not only television production but also news broadcasting. Not the case anymore, I admit. Now, two of my favourite TV series of all time were made by the BBC, Top Gear and Doctor Who. When I say Top Gear, I mean the reboot from the early 2000s up until Jeremy Clarkson punched a producer and Clarkson, Hammond and May buggered off to Amazon and made millions. When it was reintroduced with Chris Evans as the main host, I watched the first 10 minutes of the first episode. I have never watched Top Gear since, other than the repeats on BBC Two on a Sunday night in its old 8 o'clock slot. Doctor Who was rebooted in 2005, I think, and we all knew that Doctor Who was a bit crap. It never really had the budget or the special effects. But Christopher Eccleston, David Tennant and Matt Smith were excellent. Peter Capaldi, I will argue, was probably the best actor ever to play the Doctor, but by then all the woke crap had kicked in. In one episode where the Doctor and Clara travel back to Viking times, in the village half of the Vikings were black or brown, and that's not historically accurate. Then all the LGBTQ stuff started getting shoveled in, and of course there's nothing wrong with it, except from when clearly it's being done in a way to ram it into the audience's face, where the box ticking is more important than the sodding plot. Jodie Whittaker killed the show for me, and again, I haven't watched it since. I attempted to watch the first episode with Ncuti Gatwa, or Shitty Gatwa, but given that in the first 5 minutes there was a transvestite singing on a microphone, and the first time we saw the Doctor, he was dancing with another man wearing a skirt, no, that's not for me. But when it came to current events, BBC News was always the place to go. That's no longer the case. GB News is now more popular than BBC News. And people on the woke far left are up in arms screaming, "Oh, GB News, it's so far right." Yes, the reason that GB News has overtaken the BBC is the same reason that Reform UK are doing so well in the political polls. Because GB News just says what most people are thinking. Throughout the conflict between Israel and Hamas, in my opinion, the BBC have been massively biased. Against Israel, they didn't even refer to Hamas as a terrorist group, and as we know, the BBC recently got bollocked because they released a documentary about children growing up in Gaza, where the main presenter was the son of a Hamas commander. But this week, for me, the BBC hit a new low on its flagship politics show, Question Time. For anyone unfamiliar with the format, Question Time consists of 4 panellists representing the breadth of the political spectrum, and the audience is meant to represent the differing opinions of the British voting public. That's largely bollocks. The audience are always massively skewed to the left. But this week, the BBC tried to ambush Zia Youssef of the Reform Party. Zia is a brown Muslim guy representing the dastardly white supremacists of Reform UK, when the Beeb shipped in 2 illegal immigrants into the audience. Now, I can't show anything from Question Time because the BBC are absolute bastards when it comes to copyright. That being said, I have a clip coming up of one of their earlier shows, and I bet they won't censor that. So instead, I'll have to describe what happened. Zia was explaining that in the UK, immigration is the #1 issue in British politics. And 2 illegal immigrants who'd come to the country on small boats were introduced. One was from Iran, the other was from Afghanistan. I don't remember which was which. But one of them explained that he'd come to Britain after having his asylum claim turned down in 6 other countries. Turkey, Macedonia, Slovenia, Austria, Germany, and I've forgotten another one. Either way, 6 countries took one look at him and said, "You can fuck off, you're not staying here." He got to Britain, and straight away it was, "Here's a new iPhone, there's your luxury hotel, and if you're into that sort of thing, there's a primary school just up the road." The other illegal, again, he came here in a small boat, so by definition, he is a criminal. He broke into this country illegally. He started reading from his phone, and he was remarkably well informed, talking about Britain leaving the ECHR, the European Convention on Human Rights, and the dangers it would have for British citizens. He then started talking about the Northern Ireland settlement, which, like I say, would mean he's remarkably well informed, because Mrs. Disgruntled doesn't know about the Northern Ireland settlement, and she's from Northern fucking Ireland. However, it transpired, or it's alleged, that not only was he reading from his phone, but if we look at this photo, he's wearing a fucking earpiece. So why are the BBC so hell-bent on trying to embarrass Reform UK? Well, this is just my opinion. Firstly, I think because Reform goes against the BBC's woke left narrative, and secondly, if Reform get into government, they've said they'll abolish the licence fee. So then, the BBC would have to stand on its own 2 feet rather than relying on handouts from the taxpayer. And this wasn't the only hit piece done against Reform this week by the Beeb. Nigel Farage, the leader of Reform UK, and I'll tell you now, if 5 years ago someone had told me that I would be considering voting for Nigel Farage, what the guy from the Brexit Party and UKIP, to be the next Prime Minister of this country, I would have thought they were mad. But now, Nigel Farage is the fucking sensible option. Yet, the BBC and other news organisations have dug up some dirt on him because apparently when he was at school 49 years ago, he may or may not have made some mildly racist comments. Now that is scraping the fucking barrel. First of all, if we look back at history with modern values and standards, history will always look wrong. But Farage would have been 12 or 13 years old at the time. Have these journalists never met adolescent boys? They are fucking stupid. They go out of their way to shock and say the most outrageous things. Now, if you want to find something stupid that I wrote online, just see what I did on Facebook yesterday. Most mornings I wake up and the first thing I do is scroll through seeing, did I put something fucking daft online last night? So I don't really remember the 1970s because I was only 2 when they ended. But attitudes then were very, very different. And that doesn't mean that it was right at the time. It just means that it was what was accepted. So I mentioned a clip from the BBC earlier. Here it is. This is the black and white minstrel show. Prime time Saturday night viewing on the Beeb, where white men would black up with boot polish and sing songs about being, and I quote, being a hard-working N-word on the plantation. So the Beeb are worried about what a teenage boy said in the 1970s, whilst at the same time they were broadcasting this. The BBC also had the sitcoms It Ain't Half Hot Mum and Till Death Us Do Part, which by modern standards are massively racist. ITV were no better. They had Rising Damp, which to this day is still hilarious, and Love Thy Neighbour, which is utterly vile. You can find that series on YouTube. Love Thy Neighbour has no comedy. Every episode is half an hour of racial slurs and nothing else. But to me, this also suggests that just like the Labour Party, the BBC are terrified of reform. Because they're different, they don't toe the line. And like I say, this isn't meant to be a fucking political channel. Like I said, 5 years ago, I would never have believed I'd be supporting Nigel Farage. But the shower of shit we've got in at the minute, who are bending over backwards to destroy this country and all its values and traditions, it's going insane. I truly hope we have an election before 2029, because if we don't, there won't be a country left to fucking save. So that was a short, unplanned, ranty video. I was just out for a walk in the rain and thought I'd start, shouting. Anyway, if you enjoyed it, please do like and subscribe if you haven't already. If you can leave a like, a comment or share the video, that really helps the algorithm. If you'd like to support me in making these videos, there's a link in the description to buy me a coffee, and as ever, thanks for watching. So I mentioned that fucking bollocks. So I mentioned a show that was broadcast by the fucking hell, Dan, come on. So I mentioned a show that was broadcast by the BBC. And here it is. This is the black and white minstrel show. This was... Oh, fuck it. However, with all those sitcoms, the important thing is that if you watch them now, it's clear that the white guy is always the brunt of the joke. The white guy's always the fucking idiot. And I think that's why, to a certain extent, they still endure. Not Love Thy Neighbour, like I say, that's fucking horrible. But Rising Damp. Your main character, Rigsby, played by Leonard Rossiter, was basically a slum landlord who wanted to be an English country gentleman. And one of his tenants was called Philip, who was an African prince. So, because Philip had been educated, I think it was at fucking eat. The point was, the African guy was more of an English gentleman than Rigsby. I fucked it up.